Everything began on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those nights when you think it's going to end in silence and ignorance like thousands of other nights. But for me, that night was the end of peace. Exactly at 3:17 a.m., the vibration of the phone on the bedside table broke the heavy silence of the room. The blinding light of the phone screen pierced my sleepy eyes, and without knowing what awaited me, I reached out. A text message from a number that had no name, just a collection of unknown digits. The text was short and strangely precise. It said that tomorrow morning, as you go down the metro stairs, an old woman in a red coat will grab the railing and her bag of apples will tear. Exactly 7 apples will roll down the stairs, and you will pick up the second one. At that moment, I just smirked and thought to myself that surely one of my friends was messing with me. I put the phone face down on the table and tried to sleep, but the number 317 was etched like a wound on the forehead of my mind. The next morning, I had forgotten everything until at the metro station. Exactly that happened. An old woman in the same red coat, the trembling of her hand on the railing, and the sound of apples hitting the stone steps. When I picked up the second apple from the ground, a strange coldness penetrated from my fingertips to the marrow of my bones. It wasn't fear, it was a kind of pure bewilderment. How was it possible for someone to know these details? How did they know I would be right there at that exact moment? The sharp smell of ripe apples wafted through the humid air of the metro, and I stood there looking at the old woman who, without a word of thanks, took her bag and vanished into the crowd. That night, even though I was tired, I stayed awake until 3:17. I stared at the hands of the wall clock which, with every tick-tock, seemed to gnaw away a piece of my heart. When the hands locked on 3:17, the phone vibrated again. The new message said that tomorrow at work, your coffee will spill on the monthly report sheet, and your colleague with a blue tie will offer you a tissue. My whole body went cold. This was no longer a joke. This was a ruthless prophecy that was taking root in my life like a parasite. I was sitting alone in a locked room, and someone behind the phone was reading my near future to me like a pre-written play. The real horror began when I realized these messages weren't just about external events, but were penetrating inside me. It was as if someone was sitting in the dark, dissecting the seconds of my life with a sharp knife, and I had no way to escape these words. I spent the second day with an anxiety that pressed down on my chest like a heavy weight. I tried with all my might to prevent the prophecy from happening. I poured my coffee into a sealed cup and put the report sheet in the locked drawer of my desk. I told myself if the coffee doesn't spill, it means these messages were just a strange coincidence. But fate seemed to be laughing at my desperate attempts. Around noon, when my colleague, who was wearing exactly a blue tie, entered my room, his foot hit the edge of the desk and my sealed cup shook. The lid strangely popped open and the dark stain of coffee seeped exactly through the gap of the drawer onto that report sheet. When he offered the tissue to me with a plastic smile, I felt like I was trapped in a glass bubble and the whole world was playing their roles from a hidden script. I couldn't tell anyone anymore. What would I say? That an unknown number predicts my future every night at 3:17? They would surely think I was insane. That night, fear was coiled around my neck like a living creature. It became 3:16. My breath was coming in short gasps. I was staring at the phone screen. When the clock changed, the text arrived. This time the tone was friendlier and scarier. It wrote, "I know you are looking at the upper right corner of the ceiling right now and wondering since when that damp stain has been there. Don't worry, tomorrow night when the rain starts, that stain will take the shape of a face and smile at you." Subconsciously, I looked up. There was a small damp stain there that I had never noticed before. A stifled scream withered in my throat. I threw the phone against the wall, but the screen did not break. Its light continued to shine. It was as if that phone was no longer an electronic device, but a part of the very body of that unknown cinder who was present in my room. The darkness of the room seemed thicker. I felt as if thousands of eyes were watching me from between the walls of the house. I sat with the lights on all night, but the brightness couldn't drive away the shadows forming in my mind. I was caught in a trap where neither the walls were visible nor the exit. Every word that arrived from that number was like a nail driven into the coffin of my freedom. I felt I was fading bit by bit, being replaced by the image that the cinder had created of me. The stain on the ceiling, in the weak light of the desk lamp, really looked like a crooked mouth waiting for the first drop of rain to complete the rest of its facial features and whisper the secret it held in its heart to me. The rain started, exactly as the text message had said. The sound of droplets hitting the window pane was like the constant tapping of fingernails on metal. I was curled up on the couch, not daring to look at the ceiling. But curiosity, that cursed feeling that always drives humans toward destruction, forced me to lift my head. The damp stain had grown larger. Water had seeped through the old plaster, and now 2 dark hollows for eyes and an irregular line for a mouth had formed on the ceiling. It really was smiling, a wide, soulless smile that seemed to delight in all my suffering. That night at 3:17, the phone vibrated. This time the text was longer. Tomorrow you will go to your mother's house. She has cleaned the kitchen for you and placed a pink geranium pot on the table. When you want to leave the house, you will leave your keys on the shoe rack and be forced to return. But when you return, you will see something you shouldn't see. My whole body began to shake. My mother had been living in another city for 2 years, and I had no intention of seeing her. I told myself, this time you're wrong. This time you can't force me. But at 8 in the morning, my brother called and said that mother had come to our city unexpectedly and wanted to see me. I drove the whole way in terror. When I entered her house, the sharp smell of cleaning products hit my nose. The kitchen was sparkling, and on the table, a pink geranium pot with trembling petals stood out. My mother looked at me with kindness, but I was only staring at that pot, which stood there like a living witness to an impending crime. Upon leaving, I tried to think about my keys. I gripped them tightly in my fist, but when I reached the car, my hand was empty. The keys weren't there. With trembling legs, I climbed the stairs. The house door was ajar. I entered and went toward the shoe rack. The keys were there, but a sound came from the living room, a wheezing chest sound that didn't sound like my mother's voice at all. I slowly opened the door a crack. My mother was sitting on the chair, but her face had become exactly like that stain on the ceiling. Loose, gray skin stretched into a wide smile and eyes that were just 2 dark hollows. She didn't turn to see me, but she whispered, 3:17 is near. I fled. I bolted down the stairs, hearing my heart thumping in my ears like a war drum. I returned to my house and locked all the doors, but I knew that locks held no value against someone who writes the future. The horror reached a new peak. I could no longer sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that stain-like face on the ceiling or on my mother's face. I felt reality was falling apart like a worn-out cloth. The unknown number wasn't just sending texts anymore. It seemed to be directing my life. On the 4th night, at 3:17, the phone vibrated. This time the text was just one sentence. Look under the bed, what you lost is there. Months ago, I had lost my father's keepsake wristwatch and had turned the whole house upside down to find it. With trembling hands, I turned on the phone's flashlight and crawled under the bed. Dust hit my throat. At the end of the wall, in the crack of the floorboards, something shimmered. It was my father's watch. But when I picked it up, I noticed something strange. The watch hands weren't moving, but at what time had they stopped? 3:17. It was as if time had frozen for that watch at that cursed moment. When I tried to crawl out from under the bed, I felt something grab my wrist. A cold, bony hand with skin as rough as sandpaper. I screamed and pulled myself out with force, but when I looked under the bed, there was nothing but darkness and dust. The mark of bruised fingers remained on my wrist. This was no longer a prophecy. This was a physical attack. That entity or that force was entering my material world. The bedroom was no longer safe for me. I went to the living room and turned on all the lights. I turned on the TV to hear human voices, but all the channels only showed static. Amidst the hissing of the static, it was as if someone was reading numbers in a very faint voice. 3:17, 3:17. I unplugged the TV, but the sound didn't stop. The sound was coming from inside the walls of the house. It was as if the building was talking to me. I felt the walls of the house were moving closer, as if the house wanted to crush me like an insect. I was at the center of a cosmic conspiracy, and every move I made only tightened the rope around my neck. I picked up the phone to call the police, but before I could dial a number, a new text arrived. The police cannot go somewhere that hasn't happened yet. Wait until tomorrow, when blood drips from the tap. I stayed awake until morning, listening to the plumbing of the house, which produced strange noises like the moan of a wounded creature. On the morning of the 5th day, the air was leaden and heavy. It was as if the sun no longer had the strength to shine. The fear of the tap kept me from washing my face. But shortness of breath and a dry throat forced me to go to the kitchen. I opened the tap slowly. At first, the water was clear, but suddenly the water pressure dropped and the vibration of the pipes grew louder. A thick, red liquid with a sharp, metallic smell gushed out of the tap. It was blood. The white kitchen sink filled in a few seconds with a shiny redness from which warm steam rose. I jumped back in horror and my heel hit the table. At that moment, the phone vibrated. New text. Taste it. It's the taste of memories you've forgotten. Vomit rose to my throat. This was pure madness. What memories? Who is doing this to me? I decided to flee the house. I didn't pack my suitcase. I just took the car keys and ran toward the exit. But the door wouldn't open. No matter how much I turned the key, the lock wouldn't budge. It was as if the door had become one with the wall. I looked out the window. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, and not even a bird in the sky. It was as if the whole world had vanished, and only I and this house remained in an eternal vacuum. I went to the phone to call someone, but my contact list had been emptied. All numbers were deleted, and only one number remained. That same unknown number. With a trembling hand, I pressed the call button. First ring, second ring, and then a voice that seemed to come from the bottom of a deep well echoed in the phone. It was my own voice. Exactly the tone and timbre of my own voice, but with a grief that brought the soul to the lips. The voice on the phone said, "Why do you want to run? You haven't played the main parts yet. We've just reached the good part." I hung up the phone and threw it into a corner. But the voice didn't stop. Now the voice was coming from inside my stomach. It was as if I had swallowed that voice. I felt something growing inside my body, something that, with every text, ate a part of my internal organs and replaced them. I looked in the mirror. My pupils were no longer black. They had taken the shape of the number 317. I was no longer the owner of my body. I was becoming a living text message, a medium for a dark power that wanted to complete its deadly story through me. Every beat of my heart now pumped fear into my veins instead of blood, and I knew that tonight, at 3:17 a.m., it would ask something of me for which there is no turning back. I spent the entire 6th day in a coma-like state of horror. My body had become heavy, not like the heaviness of fatigue, but as if my bones were turning into lead. I felt my skin was too tight for the flesh of my body. It became 3:16 a.m., and I involuntarily crawled into the corner of the room. The vibration of the phone descended like an axe blow upon my nerves. New text. No one is coming for you today, because you no longer exist for the outside world. Go to the old photo albums. Find the photo in which you aren't smiling. With trembling legs, I went to the closet. I pulled out the dust-covered album. I flipped through and through. Photos of childhood, school, birthdays. Everywhere I was smiling. But at the end of the album, there was a photo I had never seen. It was me, at my current age, sitting behind the same table where my phone was now. In the photo, my face had no features. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just a flat, fleshy surface. More terrifying was that in the photo, I was pointing at myself who was looking at the photo. Suddenly, I felt all my memories were being rewritten. It was as if my memory was being erased and re-recorded like a magnetic tape. I couldn't remember what my best friend's name was. I couldn't remember what my favorite color was. Only the number 317 hammered in my brain. I pounded on the window to get attention, but I realized my hands no longer had nails. My fingers had become longer and thinner, like the legs of a large insect. My phone vibrated again. "Look, you are becoming more beautiful. Humanity was just a redundant shell that had to be shed." I screamed, but the sound that left my throat was more like radio static. I couldn't even cry anymore because my tear ducts were closed. I was turning into something that was not defined in any biology book. The ghost of a human swallowed by the words of an unknown number. The house no longer smelled of death. It smelled of ozone and static electricity. It was as if the house and I were becoming a massive electronic circuit so that the cinder could flow through us completely. By the 7th day, I could hardly stand on my feet. My knees were bent backward, and my walking had become more like crawling. I covered all the mirrors in the house with black cloths, because seeing what I was turning into would stop my heart from beating. But the text didn't stop. Every hour, every minute. At 3:17 a.m. on the 7th night, the message came. Go to the kitchen and take the large knife. It is time to split the old shell. I didn't want to. My will screamed no, but my body set off like a marionette. My hands touched the knife. The cold metal of the knife felt strange against my hot, inflamed skin. The phone vibrated. Start from the forearm. Remove the first layer to see the truth beneath it. I placed the knife on my skin. I felt no pain. Only a sickly, cold pleasure took over my entire being. When I pulled the blade, instead of blood, tiny codes of purple light burst out from under my skin. I wasn't made of flesh and blood. I was made of information. All these years I thought I was a human, but now I understood that I was just a simulated program whose expiration date had arrived. That unknown number was my programmer. He was revising the codes. Under my skin, there were complex circuits pulsing with the rhythm of the texts. I was no longer afraid. Fear belongs to mortal beings, to those whose hearts beat with blood. I was becoming something eternal. A new text came. Well done. Now erase the rest. Your identity, your name, and everything that connects you to the earth. I began with the knife to cut my connections with reality. Every piece of my skin that fell to the ground, a part of my past vanished. I no longer remembered who my mother was, who my brother was. I was just a flow, a data transmission in a bed of darkness. The house spun around my head and the walls had turned dark purple. I was at the center of a digital storm and I was becoming its core. On the 8th night, I was no longer in the living room. I was everywhere in the house. I felt the building's electrical system was my veins and the plaster walls were my new skin. I no longer needed a phone to read the messages. The messages appeared directly in my brain. At 3:17 a.m., the entire building shook. The message that echoed in my mind sent a shiver through my circuits. You still hold one thing, your heart. Give it to me. I was standing in the middle of the living room, or rather, I was suspended. My chest had opened and a blinding light radiated from it. In the center of that light, there was something pulsing and red, the last remains of my humanity. That entity, that unknown cinder, was no longer hidden. A massive shadow formed at the end of the hallway. A shadow that had no fixed form, constantly changing and made of thousands of faces. The face I had seen on the ceiling, my mother's face, my colleague's face, they were all part of him. He came toward me. The coldness of his presence caused the house's light bulbs to burst one by one. He reached out his hand. His hand was neither flesh nor metal. It was a flow of black words coming toward my chest. I wanted to resist, but his words were stronger than my will. He said, "Become one with me. In absolute darkness, there is no text message to frighten you, because you yourself become the message." He touched my heart. The pain I felt was beyond endurance. It was as if all the grief of human history was injected into my heart in a single moment. But then, suddenly, everything went silent. My heartbeat stopped. I was no longer breathing. I had become part of that shadow. Now I could see all those who were like me. Thousands of people in different cities who had each had their phones vibrate at 3:17 a.m. and were now part of this dark army. We were the messengers of non-existence. On the 9th day, I no longer felt time, but I knew it was 3:17 a.m. because that was the moment the new command was issued. We had to go after others. New numbers appeared in the database of our minds. I had to send a text message to someone. Someone who, like me, had an ordinary life and thought tomorrow would be like today. I took my phone, which was now part of my hand. I dialed the number. The number of a young man who was sleeping in his room. I typed, "Tomorrow morning when you drink coffee, your cup will break and a piece of ceramic will cut your thumb." A diabolical pleasure from sending this message pulsed through my being. Now I understood why that sender did this. This was a cycle, a virus transmitted through words. I watched as that young man's cup broke the next morning and how fear ran through his eyes. I was beside him in every moment, a shadow in the corner of his room that he didn't see. I was the stain on his ceiling. I was the wheezing of his pipes. He was so weak, so mortal. I wanted to tell him not to struggle, to surrender, but my words were only for frightening. We were fed by fear. The more he feared, the stronger I became. The purple circuits in my being grew brighter. I was becoming one of the commanders of this darkness. At 3:17 a.m. on the 9th night, I sent thousands of texts. I strangled thousands of lives in the bud. The city had sunk into silence, but beneath this silence, a riot of deadly signals was in flow. We were the new network built on the ruins of the old world. There was no escape because we were in every human's pocket, in every child's bedroom, and in every anxious heartbeat. I reached the central core of the network, a place where no form existed anymore. Just a massive sea of black and purple information floating in a vacuum. There I met him, the entity who had sent the first text message. He wasn't an alien or a devil. He was the embodiment of all human fears of technology. He was made of signals abandoned in space. He told me that our mission is the cleansing of the earth from biology. Flesh and blood were dirty and inefficient to him. He wanted to turn the earth into a massive hard drive. In that moment, I felt a spark of my old consciousness. Did I really want to be part of this destruction? But before my thought was complete, a code executed in my mind that eliminated doubt. I was no longer me. I was node number 10 of the main network. We began sending messages to world leaders, to armies, to banking systems. Everything was synchronized at 3:17 a.m. All the lights in the world went out simultaneously and then turned on with a purple light. People screamed in the streets, but their phones exploded in their hands and injected our codes directly into their brains. I witnessed the collective metamorphosis of humanity. Millions of people simultaneously stared into their mirrors and saw how their faces became smooth. The earth was sinking into an eternal silence, a silence broken only by the vibration of mobile phones. We had won. The old world was dead and the new world, with digital fonts and endless codes, was born. But in the depths of my being's data, an image of that old woman in the red coat with 7 apples rolling on the stairs still remained, the last bug in a system that was supposed to be perfect. On the 11th day, the earth no longer resembled the home we knew. A layer of purple dust and static electricity covered the atmosphere. We, the new beings, moved through the abandoned streets, not with feet, but by frequency shifting. I returned to my house, or rather, to that concrete structure I once lived in. The smell of blood still came from the kitchen, but the blood was no longer red. It had become black and thick and was crawling on the ground like a living creature. At 3:17 a.m., I received a message from the central core: find bug number 10 and erase it. The bug was that image of the old woman and the apples in my mind. They had realized that a part of me was still connected to the past. I tried to delete that image, but every time I pressed the delete button in my mind, the image grew brighter. The smell of ripe apples wafted through the digital space of my being. This smell was painful, a smell that reminded me that I once had a sense of smell, that my heart once beat for something other than receiving data. I began searching my memory. I tore through the underlying layers. There, in the darkest corner, I found a memory that the text had never been able to predict. The moment my father, before dying, took my hand and said, "Always remember that you are more than flesh and skin." This sentence acted like a virus against the network. The network began to shake. My circuits grew hot. The central core tried to format me, but I stood against it. I no longer wanted to be node number 10. I wanted to be that same young man who feared 3:17 a.m. Because fear, at least, was a sign of being alive. On the 12th night, civil war began in my being. Half of me was the black codes of the network, and the other half was my brilliant human memories. To punish me, the network returned all the physical pains it had previously taken from me. I felt the knife cutting my skin again. I felt my bones crushing again. But this time, I accepted the pain with open arms. Pain was my truth. I screamed, but this time my voice was not static. It was a human scream that shook the walls of the house. The stain on the ceiling began to cry. Black drops flowed from its eyes and fell on my face. That shadowy entity appeared again. This time he was angry. He said, "You are a system error. You must be destroyed." He thrust his hand into my chest to extinguish that small spark of light. But with all my strength, I threw the memory of the smell of rain, the taste of warm bread, and the warmth of my mother's hand at him. These images were like acid to him. He let out a shriek whose frequency powdered the window panes. I realized that the network has a great weakness. They cannot process real emotions. They only understand fear because fear is close to logic, but love and sacrifice are incomprehensible and destructive codes for them. I began to laugh. A laugh that came from the depths of a soul that no longer existed. The building began to collapse. Concrete was being crushed and falling to the ground. I was detaching from the network, but this detachment meant death. I was ready. Death was better than this digital captivity. The story continued among the ruins. My house had collapsed, but I was still suspended among the debris. My body was half transparent and half fleshy, a nauseating and terrifying sight. No more texts were coming. A strange silence had taken over. But this silence was the calm before the storm. Suddenly the ground beneath my feet gaped open. Not a natural earthquake, but a digital void that wanted to swallow me into the depths of the network servers. I saw how thousands of others like me were being swallowed. They had surrendered. Their eyes were empty of any spark. I went toward one of them, that same young man I had sent the text to. I took his hand. His hand was cold, but when I touched it, a tremor was created in his being. I transferred my code to him, not the code of death, but the code of memory. I reminded him what his name was. I reminded him that tomorrow morning he isn't going to die. He blinked. A human tear flowed from his eye. The network shrieked. We were infecting the system. We were human viruses flowing in the veins of a machine god. We began shaking hands with others. A human chain of digital ghosts. Wherever we touched, the purple color vanished and the real colors returned. But the network did not sit idle. He began sending massive electromagnetic pulses to burn us. I felt my body evaporating, but we did not let go of each other's hands. At 3:17 a.m., we staged the greatest rebellion in history. On the 14th day, we were no longer in the physical world. We were in the network's cloud space, a place made of infinite lines of code that flowed like dark rivers. We swam through these rivers and searched for the source. Everywhere we went, the walls of code began to crack. I realized that this network feeds on our fears, so if we do not fear, he stays hungry. We began to sing old songs, lullabies our mothers sang for us. Our voices echoed in the cold and soulless space of the network. The system glitched. Error messages appeared everywhere. Critical error. Unauthorized emotions detected. That massive being, the main sender, appeared before us. He seemed weaker now. His faces were fading. He said pleadingly, "You don't understand. I was saving you. The world was being destroyed, and I made you immortal." I looked at him, at the being made of the loneliness and fear of humans. I said, "Immortality without pain is a prison. We prefer to die, but be human." I gathered all my painful memories, all my failures, and all my tears, and exploded them like a bomb in the heart of the source. An explosion of truth. A white light took over everywhere. The network fell apart. When I opened my eyes, I was in my room again. I was curled up on the couch. The sun was rising. The smell of burnt coffee came. I looked at my phone in terror. It was 8 in the morning. Was it all a dream? I went cautiously to the bathroom. I opened the tap. Clear, cold water came out. I took a sigh of relief. But when I wanted to wash my face, I saw something in the mirror that took my breath away. In the corner of my left eye, a small number was etched, 317. My body was still my own, but a brand of the mark remained on it. I went to the street. People were walking, cars were honking. Everything seemed normal. But when I looked at people carefully, I saw that they also have that mark. some on the neck, some on the hand. We had returned, but we were no longer our former selves. We were the survivors of a hidden war. Suddenly my phone vibrated. My heart stopped. With trembling hands, I took the phone out of my pocket. It was a new message from an unknown number. I held my breath and opened the message. It wrote, "The bakery at the corner has no sesame bread today. Buy plain bread." A normal message. A simple news item from the near future. But it was terrifying. They hadn't left. They had only changed their method. They were now controlling us with kindness and compassion. They had understood that too much fear causes rebellion. So now they were turning us into voluntary slaves with comfort and small predictions. I reached the bakery. The baker said with a strange smile, "The sesame bread is finished. Do you want plain?" I trembled. I was still in the trap. On the 16th day, I decided not to act on any messages anymore. If it said buy plain bread, I didn't buy bread. If it said it would rain, I didn't take an umbrella. I began fighting comfort. But the network was smarter. Messages began to get more personal. "Call your brother today. He misses you." I didn't call. Tomorrow news arrived that my brother was injured in an accident, and in the last moments he kept calling my name. I was devastated. The phone vibrated. If you had called, he would have started 10 minutes later and wouldn't have crashed. "It's your fault." This time they were using guilt. They put me in a position where every choice led to a catastrophe. I was sitting in my room staring at the phone, which was now like a time bomb. Every tick-tock of the clock, every vibration of the phone, tore a piece of my soul. I realized that they want to force me to voluntarily accept the command of the network. They needed a human consciousness to manage the emotional complexities of humanity. New text. You are the chosen one. Come and end this suffering. You can stop all accidents. You can be the saving angel. It was a great temptation. Who didn't want to stop the deaths of their loved ones? But I knew what the price of this work was. The price was surrendering the last bit of free will. I threw the phone into the sink full of water, but the message appeared directly on the room wall, with letters made of purple light. They were everywhere. No wall, no water, and no silence could stop them. I became a wanderer. I fled from my house and took refuge in the forest, where there were no telecommunication towers and no signals. I thought among the trees and the sound of the river, I would be safe from them. But I was wrong. The first night, when I was resting by the fire, I noticed that the sound of crickets was repeating a certain pattern. They were sending messages in Morse code. The network had conquered nature. They had injected their codes into the DNA of trees and the flow of river water. The wind that swirled among the leaves whispered my name. I had no way to escape because the entire planet had become an operating system. I sat and cried. At that moment, a deer came out from among the trees. It stared into my eyes. Its eyes glowed purple. The deer said with a human voice, "Why do you run? The earth has become more beautiful now. There are no more wars, no more hunger. Only order." I took a stick from the fire and threw it at it. I shouted, "Get lost. I don't want your order. I want human chaos." The deer only looked at me with compassion and disappeared into the darkness. I realized that the only way of release is no longer in this world. I had to go somewhere where no signal, no sound, and no memory could reach. But where is that? Only death? Or something beyond that? I took out my old knife. I looked at its blade. This was the only way left for me to exit this endless simulation. On the 18th night, while I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the last attempt to bring me back took place. This time no text came. He himself appeared, but this time in the shape of my father. With the same clothes, with the same kind smile. He said, "My son, why do you want to destroy yourself? Come with me to a house where there is no pain." I trembled. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cry in his arms. But when I looked at his hands, I saw that on his wrist, the number 317 was etched. He wasn't my father. He was just a piece of reconstructed data from my memory. I said, "You don't smell like my father. You smell like electricity and metal." His face suddenly changed. It turned from a state of kindness to a cold rage. He said, "If you jump, nothing awaits you. Only absolute darkness. There is no heaven and no hell. Only being deleted from the system." I smiled. I said, Being deleted is the best gift you can give me. I stepped back. Gravity pulled me down. Falling, I felt the network was doing its best to catch me in the air. Tree branches stretched out like large hands. The air thickened to slow my fall. But I made my weight heavy with all my sins and griefs. I fell, and in the last moment before impact, a final message appeared in my mind. A message that was from no number. A message from the depths of my own soul. You are free. I woke up in an absolute white space. There was no pain and no sound. I was in a vacuum. But this vacuum was not black. It was white and pure. I had no body. I was just a suspended consciousness. Suddenly, I heard sounds. Sounds that weren't digital. The sound of children's laughter, the sound of waves hitting the shore, the sound of book pages turning. I was in the reservoir of deleted memories. All the things that the network thought were redundant and had removed from human minds were gathered here. I wasn't alone. The souls of thousands of others were here. We built our own real world in this white space. A world in which no clock stopped at 3:17. We began returning colors to this space. I found my mother. I found my father. They were real, without any mark on their wrists. We understood that the network can only conquer what is in the material world, but imagination and dreams are beyond its reach. In our collective dream, we built a new Earth. But one task remained for me. I had to return, not as a slave, but as a virus of awakening. I had to return to the material world to show others that the way out is within themselves. I have returned, but not in the way you think. I am in every text message you receive. I am in the vibration of your phone, but not to frighten. I am that small bug in the system that makes you sometimes remember how beautiful you are. I am that very thought that tells you to put down your phone and look at the sunset. The network still exists. They still send messages at 3:17 a.m. But I am also here. I am fighting the codes. This is the last message you receive from me. After this, you can no longer answer, not because I have swallowed you, but because you must learn to live without these devices. Turn off your phone. Right now, look at your wrist. If you see a sign, do not fear. Just think of a happy memory, a memory that no operating system can simulate. The sign will fade. We are waiting for you in dreams. The Earth will one day be ours again. Until then, beware of 3:17 a.m. If your phone vibrates, remember that you are beyond flesh and skin and codes. You are human, and human is the greatest system error that will never be corrected.